Hi, I'm Lizzie Trotter. I'm Head of Social Impact and Wellbeing at State of Life. We help organisations to measure and value their social impact or social value. And we worked with Activity Alliance on this bit of work. We are advisors to the Treasury on how to measure and value wellbeing. And our Chief Economist, Alan Little, was actually a co-author of the Green Book supplementary guidance on that topic. So it was a great opportunity to work with Activity Alliance on this piece of work. Rose Fawcett led on the analysis, and Rose also led on our Sport England work, which was released last month in October 2024, which developed a new national model of social value for sport and physical activity. So this bit of work that we did with Activity Alliance actually builds on that Sport England work really nicely. The Sport England work was looking at the general population, whereas this is obviously looking specifically at the experience of disabled people. So it was really nicely timed, really well aligned, and it's great to be able to tell you a bit more about it. So the problem to be solved, we wanted to look at the social value that was created when disabled people are more physically active. And we started off the work with a literature review. We found that the research showed that considerable social value was created when people are more physically active, but crucially, the research is lacking in relation specifically to disabled people. The research that is out there that looks at disabled people isn't consistent with government guidance of how to measure and value wellbeing, so relating to that Treasury Green Book guidance that I just mentioned. And so this literature review really showed that there was that gap in the research, and that this work that we were doing with Activity Alliance was really well timed and really well focused to fill that gap. Our approach to the bit of work. So as we did with the Sport England work, we analysed Sport England's active lives data set. So this is a national data set, really, really big, and we used it to explore the impact of being active on the wellbeing of disabled people. We explored the impact of different levels of physical activity, and we were informed here by the Sport England thresholds of activity levels. So, for example, we looked at the impact of being active, and this is defined as 150 minutes or more of physical activity a week. But we also looked outside of those thresholds. So we looked at low levels, which includes basically 1 to 149 minutes per week. But also underneath that, we looked at doing only light activity, which is activity that doesn't raise your heart rate or your breathing. And this doesn't actually count in terms of Sport England's physical activity thresholds, basically. It doesn't reach the level of any activity. But we'll see in this research, it came out to be really valuable. The analysis technique that we used is called regression analysis. And what this does is it allows us to control for factors that we know can influence wellbeing. So this includes things like age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, working status, education, and general health. And it's really important that we can include these in the model and control for them, because this means we can be more certain that we're getting to the relationship between physical activity and well-being, because we're factoring out all of these other things, basically. To calculate the social value, we converted those impacts that we revealed through the analysis. We converted them to a monetary value using the WellBe. So this stands for a wellbeing adjusted life year. And this is a new standard measure, basically, that's come out of the latest government guidance on how to value wellbeing impacts. So what is a WellBe? So the WellBe, or the Wellbeing Adjusted Life Year, is a unit of value that is endorsed in the Treasury Green Book. It's basically said to be a change in a life satisfaction point on this 0 to 10 scale. So the question at the bottom of the slide, it says, overall, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays on a scale of 0 to 10? 0 being not at all, and 10 being completely. And this is a measure that was developed by the Office for National Statistics. This is in dozens of surveys in the UK and increasingly internationally as well. So the WellBe has been defined as a shift of 1 point on this 0 to 10 scale. And if you can say that it's been caused by the intervention you're interested in, it's affecting one person over 1 year, that is a WellBe. And the Treasury have put a monetary value on it, and it is valued at £15,300. And this has been adjusted for inflation. But this is now a standard way to measure and value wellbeing impacts. So anyone who is trying to improve the quality of life of the population in whatever way should be using this wellbeing to measure and value the impact that they're having. So really important step forward in this area of wellbeing measurement and wellbeing valuation. We took the same approach in our work for Sport England, but we've also been using it for quite a while. We've used it in our work with Parkrun, used it in our work with Tier Fund, the Canal and River Trust. But crucially also, the Wellbe is benchmarked to a measure called the QALY, which you may be aware of, which stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year. And that is a health measure that's used by NICE in the NHS. So it's a really important factor of the Wellbe, basically, that it is benchmarked to the QALY, because it enables you to talk to a health audience when you're talking about wellbeing impacts. So we started off our analysis of the active lives data set by looking at reported life satisfaction. So just, the starting point, if you like. And we found that disabled people report a much lower level of life satisfaction than non-disabled people. It's just over 1.5 points on that 0 to 10 scale. And in wellbeing terms, this is a really big gap. And just as a point of comparison, being employed compared to being unemployed is associated with a 0.5 shift on that 0 to 10 scale. So it gives you a sense of that magnitude of difference that we're talking about. So what is the impact of physical activity on that life satisfaction? It's just worth saying at this point that some of the values that you see here are slightly different to those in the Sport England work. And there are good reasons for this. One of them is, in the Sport England work, we were looking at the general population compared to people with disabilities or long-term health conditions, whereas here we're looking at disabled adults and non-disabled adults. So different groups that we're comparing, basically. And also the activity levels are being compared to a different base point, if you like. So in the Sport England work, we're comparing it to the Sport England category of inactive, but that's actually 1 to 29 minutes of activity, whereas here we're using the comparison point of no activity at all. So slightly technical, but just to explain that is why some of these values are different, because of these different comparison points in the data. Okay, so what is the social value of light activity only for disabled people? And just as a reminder, light activity is physical activity that doesn't raise your heart rate or your breathing. So we found by analysing the data that a disabled adult doing light activity only is associated with an increase in life satisfaction, for starters, and that is of the magnitude of 0.287 on that 0 to 10 life satisfaction scale. So it's considerable. And using the Wellbe valuation approach, this gives us a social value of £4,400 per person per year. If we look at non-disabled adult, the value of doing light activity only is actually insignificant. So a huge difference between these two groups in the population of the impact of doing light activity only. What is the social value of doing some moderate activity? So this is 1 to 149 minutes per week. We saw in disabled people in the data, this moderate activity is associated with an increase in life satisfaction of 0.294 on that 0 to 10 scale. So really similar to the light activity, just a little bit higher, and worth £4,500 per person per year using that Wellbe valuation approach. Compared to non-disabled adults in the data, we found moderate activity was a positive increase in life satisfaction, but worth much less, a smaller increase and worth only £500 per person per year. So it really gives you that sense of the different experience between these two groups of people in the data and the impact of these levels of physical activity. And finally, if we look at the social value of being active, so this is 150 minutes or more every week. For a disabled person, it's a really big increase in life satisfaction, 0.332 to 0.406. So, and if we convert that to monetary value using the Wellbe valuation approach, it's worth £5,100 to £6,200. And if we look at non-disabled adults, it's between £1,900 and £2,000. So almost over 3 times more for disabled adults in terms of this activity level. So really big difference between these two population groups again. And if we just look at these on a chart, it gives you a really nice sense of that magnitude of difference, basically. And it shows you that any level of physical activity has the potential to provide huge well-being impacts for disabled adults, even though they might not even sort of count in terms of those Sport England thresholds for the general population. So a really good learning there in terms of, potentially strategic decision-making or targeting, or the delivery provisions on offer. And as I've just kind of insinuated in my last point there, the next steps for this bit of work, we'd like these findings to really feed into those kind of conversations around decision-making, policy-making, etc. The standard of analysis, the standard of this research is really, really high. It's at that treasury level, it's meeting the treasury guidance in terms of measuring and valuing these wellbeing impacts. So it's a really high level of evidence that should be feeding into those top level decisions. Similarly, can be used in funding and policy submissions, can be used talking to others, doing the same research to build intersectionality, to really build that evidence base of the different experiences out there in the population, to support further research to explore how the value of activity differs for subgroups of disabled people, or for different types of activity, or for different settings of activity, etc. There's a real opportunity there in terms of the insights that can be gathered. And the last point there is just understanding the next steps for secondary value. So this is around the value that's created through physical activity for, say, the NHS or for social care. So the impacts to the public purse, if you like, those ripple effects. So thanks very much for listening. If you've got any questions or you'd like to tell us what you think, then we'd love to hear from you.
For more information, visit activityalliance.org.uk or email hello@stateoflife.org or visit stateoflife.org.